All right, thank you, and welcome everyone to Confidence 2020. My name is Vitali Kremez, also known as VK Intel on Twitter. My talk, it's basically I wanted to talk about the North Korean group Lazarus intersection between TrickBot. I also want to dive deeper into the evolutions of crimeware intent or criminal intent and how we can use some of the adversary knowledge we know for hunting. And some of the use case I wanted to show you and demonstrate. It's one of my favorite tools, of course, YARA signature. So we'll quickly walk through how knowing specific aspects about YARA and maybe helping explaining one unique angle across the YARA signature development that you can use in your day-to-day activities that produces high fidelity results. So, okay, let's start. So the talk outline, we'll talk in the beginning, we'll talk about the crimeware intent, evolutions of criminal intent. We'll go back into the financially motivated beginnings of malware writers and what they were pursuing. We'll talk more about how the current trends across the malware landscape and what the current aspects of malware developers and malware attackers and AP, advanced persistent threat groups and crimeware groups, what do they realize? How do they search for the targets of interest to them? And some of the interesting things that came out of that, of course, you will see. We'll just decide network parsing and active directory exploitation, and then the APT approach and ransomware. And it's kind of like a seamless interactions currently beginning to happen. As we know that APT approach, it's the advanced persistent threat, it seems to be very targeted in many cases, and ransomware becomes the flavor of the day. We'll talk about the quickly emergence of Ransomhacks. And then through that approach, we'll also talk about the TrickBot before that and Lazarus. We'll talk about unique aspects that make it more interesting. It's the YARA hunting for crypto implementations. I'm a strong believer in YARA as a tool for day-to-day activities across the enterprises and networks and security products. And something that will show you an example of one specific, the TrickBot cryptor used across the Anchor and many other projects that we'll go over through the presentations, and how we can write a quick but good and sound YARA hunting rule for looking for crypto implementations within the malware, because that's the future. Who am I? My name is Vitali Kremez. I'm pretty well known on Twitter land. I previously worked in the in the U.S. In the prosecutor's office. I used to hunt cybercrime for a living, working for helping prosecute some of the most sophisticated and technically savvy groups. My work was focused on around taking down big crimeware gangs and crimeware groups. And again, of course, those that had nation-state component as well. So my work related to the government work led to my private industry work. And of course, one of the interesting things that stands out about me is that one time, of course, the APT28 group, as we know, that believed to be targeting, to be breached actually the Democratic National Committee in the US. That the same entity actually left my name in the malware after my blog went live. So it's a kind of like a tribute to the malware. And if you follow me on Twitter, feel free to follow me, VK Intel, my personal blog, where I write quite a bit on deeper, like malware reversing topics. Some of them are more technical, but they're more technical on purpose. Yeah, so let's dive deeper into that. It's me. So the cybercrime trends of 2020, what do we see currently on the landscape is that the sophisticated criminal enterprises, some of the most sophisticated currently are ongoing is TrickBot, QuackBot, and of course TA505. They are all focused on parsing and identifying high-value targets. Actually, you can include Zloader as well, as they also look for those machines with local domains and those machines that have rich networks. It's also the cybercrime meets APT, where they no longer rely simply on fully automated approach, where they would basically extract the value from the bots and automatically launch and kind of search for them. But they hire a crew of people and network operators. Used to be quite some time ago, used to be the fraud operators used to be the highest value addition for the malware groups. But now it seems to be both fraud operations and network exploitations. And Ransomhacks become also important as they used to amplify extortions, and it's kind of like lead to public disclosures and some of the groups that also work with APTs. For example, we know for a fact that REvil works with the Fin7 group. Of course, I can share you some snippets on that as well. But also we know that some groups also, including Lazarus, previously used some ransomware either for cover-up or additional financial gain. So there's an interesting aspect of, almost all the majority ransomware groups, actually, I believe almost all of them are becoming Ransomhacks, where they deploy a website and threaten to leak the data if it's not being paid. It's a pretty clever way of monetizing. And we predicted before that all the groups will be doing similar activities across the landscape. So big data collectors necessitate scalable solutions to identify high-value targets. It's corporate networks with local domain. So some of my machines may not be as useful as the corporate infection, of course, especially now with the coronavirus. What they look for, those that are connected to networks and those that have remote services available, including the RDPs, Citrix, VPNs, for example, etc. And the idea is just to squeeze more value, dollars, pounds, euros from the bots as possible. So they deploy different kinds of operations. The banking malware, they have a crew that monetizes that, credential stealers, of course, miners, and ransomware. The key component or the father of Crimeware, and it's why this person is so impactful to the talk we have, because he's the person who professionalized the approach of targeting, the approach of essentially developing new novel methods and scaling them to perfection. So the Slavic essentially that led, of course, the business club, and before that, he built a kind of hybrid attack model where they used basically an automation attack where they would deploy malware, but also they were considering, well, they had a fraud operation as well. This was known to be the business club, but also business club introduced the crypto locker, which is the first ransomware. And some of the operators that we were talking through the presentation, especially those connected to Lazarus groups, are also interconnected. And going back to the models and frameworks that Slavic developed when he was running the business. So the idea is why and what the top sophisticated crimeware and APT groups do. They hunt for those machines that have network records, and those machines are deemed to be high-value targets outside of the direct targeting that they might have through direct spear phishing or direct targeting via other means. So one of the interesting things, of course, that the key component now, which is super popular, is that the automated malware, where they deploy a kind of an emotet, for example, as a typical loader for TrickBot, or TrickBot on its own. So it's pretty equal, where they deployed Ryuk. Now, of course, Conti ransomware is the substitution of Ryuk, but the method and methodology and everything works the same, except now they have a leak website actually where they extort victims. But the way they differentiate across the spectrum of infections is through network and active directory parsing.
Vitali?
Yes?
Vitali, there seems to be a problem with slides. They are not moving. We are stuck on the initial slide for a long time.
Okay, 1 second.
Right now we are at the automated malware plus interactive human exploitation operator slide.
Okay, 1 second, please. Can you see the slides again?
Yes, I can see it, and we are at the slide with, yeah, the automated malware slide.
Okay. I was going with. And then after basically the network and active directory parsing, they oftentimes deploy the PowerShell Empire and Cobalt Strike beacons and use it for network and active directory parsing. One of the interesting aspects, of course, just to share with you some of the incidents we've seen across the TrickBot installation, that of course the Cobalt Strike and Interpreter loads basically. This is some of the images from the attacker side, and why it's so important for them to target them. So it's the view once they're infected. Oftentimes they deploy a Cobalt Strike through the PowerShell tasking of the bot or the interpreter itself, as you can see on the slides. This is kind of the adversary view on the malware and botnets on their own once they are infected. As you can see, they're looking for the admin credentials and exchanging and harvesting credentials using, for example, PSExec to spread, etc. But this is the beacon tasking and an Armitage for the Cobalt Strike beacon as well. So one of the interesting aspects, of course, that why it's so become such a big issue on the horizon from the malware side is the 5 billion extortion amount. That's what the extortion amount that the groups asked earlier, essentially once they infect the Cloud Jumper, which is the huge MSP provider, essentially providing the access to many Active Directory installations and many other components across customer interfaces. And across the interface, they infected one of the, of course, most notable infections was the LA Times, Los Angeles Times. One was infected, and it was a huge debate if Lazarus was inside the TrickBot, or TrickBot was part of Lazarus, because they also found that the Hermes ransomware was potentially deployed, or in that case, everybody thought it was Hermes, but it was in fact Ryuk, which was the ransomware used by TrickBot. And of course, they'll show the direct intersection between those groups. But this was a pretty interesting and novel component when they realized instead of like squeezing bots through credentials, activities, and they can ask for a lot of money in cryptocurrency and launder them pretty safely. And the way it allows them to enable to do that, it's through the, of course, having a steady flow of new bots, having steady flow of new corporate bots or infections that have the most impact, and infecting them with ransomware. And it was also
sorry to interrupt you once again. I'm sorry about it. But the chat says that you are probably sharing the wrong screen. Instead of the one with the actual presentation, you are sharing the one with the
earlier that's the case. It brought so much notoriety to the targeted ransomware approach, where they realized the value of having a targeted team of exploitation operators to staff their bots will be extremely successful. As you can see, the amount and extortions were over 600,000 Bitcoins across their customer interface. But this is, of course, more than $5 billion in Bitcoins after conversions now. So it's a pretty huge amount and hugely profitable. And that's something that they also noted. And also, like, just to give a quick survey of some of the interesting groups we've seen as well that utilize the kind of advanced persistent threat angle, as we talked about, that the new flavor of them, like network parsing for high value targets, or we can also call it the APT or Crimeware meets the criminal groups become APT groups, advanced persistent threat groups. They adapt the same approach. As you can see here, Doppelpaymer, it's when they were engaged in the PEMEX intrusion. Of course, I'm showing the debugging window, and that's where they were essentially attacking and extorting over 565 Bitcoins with the leak and extortion portal on their website. And this is just kind of another ransomware that also engaged, a ransomware group, also linked to Evil Corp, also behind Dridex, also linked to Slavic. And this is kind of like the genealogy, or like the tree of crime, where oftentimes comes back to Slavic as a person, because the groups also were at one point in time their customers. And this is the group that was also doing the same advanced persistent threat groups once they're on the networks. Another interesting group, of course, is the TA505. Every times we are asked what's the ransomware they deployed, and that's the one that we saw continuously deployed across their targets after extensive network profile and operation deployed by them, where they would essentially run a task and look for the bots with the network records. And you can see that the group is linked to University Hospital France attack, and then of course very targeted. Not every bot would receive the CLOP ransomware, but those that have the network records, the bots that have breach access to the network environment or local domain and Active Directory, those are the ones that are especially targeted. And you can see this is just an example of the one that we are conclusively linked to the TA505. So almost all the groups now have some sort of like unique flavor of ransomware, adopting pretty similar approaches where they use their own infection as a basis. They deploy or hire people to staff their infections to be the exploit operators. What they would, for example, open connections via, or they would ask, hey, can you download and install additional tool on the bots or additional toolkit, asking to back connect to the bot. For example, open up the PowerShell task and download, for example, PowerShell Empire or Cobalt Strike. Oftentimes they are operating very similarly. Some of the exploitation operators also are shared across the groups. So that's why you also see similar TTPs. They also rely on open source tools or those tools that are already used by penetration testing teams across the corporate networks. So something you can always see across the environments, that they are no longer having exclusive proprietary software, but also use the open source software. And the way that actually, once the access to corporate network is secured or government network, the two things can happen, as we've seen, that the access is sold as a commodity, but also offered as a service to different sophisticated groups. And that's how we came across the Lazarus infections. And some of the most interesting, some of the most prolific and highly regarded infections that we've seen are those that, of course, as we mentioned earlier, have rich network records, those that have big corporate environments that can be infected or exploited in some other ways, but also offered as a service by trusted relationship between those groups. So they can also be sold directly on the various underground forums, as if you know, so the access can be commodity as an open auction style forum. If the network access is not sold, oftentimes it's provided by different other actors to look for specific files or databases or run specific URLs across their botnets. Oftentimes the access is used as a service, of course, where they take part in the profit sharing model of once they monetize for example, ransomware. So there can be a percentage of the fee once they exploit basically and secure a payment from the victim. So there's just different profit sharing models that we've seen in the underground landscape. Again, just three ideas: direct dark web sales. We've seen financial data manipulations, for example, when stock trading. Some of the groups, also sophisticated APT groups, do that. And we sell to malware teams, or those teams that are exploitation teams that are those are the ones that would deploy a Cobalt Strike, as we showed earlier, or interpreter, and use different specific toolkits to either move the cross laterally through the network or and target, for example, point of sale terminals, or deploy ransomware directly. So what's the unique things, and as we talk through the kind of advanced persistent threat approach and ransomware and TrickBot and Lazarus, and how does it connect? So TrickBot, just to take it one step back, is the Russian-speaking sophisticated Crimeware group that were former customers, where actually they do derive back to Dyer, and Dyer were the customers of Slavic, who the person we discussed earlier, like the godfather of Crimeware, if I can call him that way. And the Lazarus is the North Korea for-profit group that is believed to be supported by the nation state government that tasked with procuring currency and bringing it back to the North Korean regime. So what do the Russians do with North Koreans, or what is the Russian group that believed to be similar gang, cybercrime gang, but actually they are more than just a gang, they're a sophisticated criminal enterprise. And how do they work within Lazarus group, which is we know to be the North Korean group? So the specific unique things that we talked about, the TrickBot enterprise, it's also no longer that we've seen the groups are just games, as I mentioned, or single. Like as you've seen, the TrickBot has sophisticated operations that comes from crypto mining, ransomware, stealers, and bank fraud, where they deploy different types of operators to staff it. And ransomware, of course, Ryuk and now Conti. Stealers, of course, and then crypto miners and bank fraud. And the idea is just to monetize their infections. And this is used to be, and this is kind of the core model behind the TrickBot, Dyer and Slavic that he developed. He realized that he can squeeze more value through ransomware, and then they also do ransomware now. And they operate as a professional coders, actually. Something that's pretty actually impressive when you look into them. And now the specific intersection between the kind of the Crimeware and APT domain is the kind of the the holy grail or the nexus between the two was that the specific tasking of bots. As I mentioned earlier, in two ways: access to to networks procured by criminal groups, or can be sold to APT groups or different other crimeware groups. It's through access as a service, for example, where the profit share, you have a profit sharing model, for example. And if I'm a crimeware or I'm an APT group and I'm asking them, hey, can you just let me know if you have specific bank internal access, for example, and they would say like, yes, we do. And then we'll either pay them a fee for the, for example, if they target like point of sale terminals or systems behind it, they'll just pay a fee, steady fee, depending on the relationship, or sell them as a commodity. As you can see here, the crimeware domain is that the stealers, fraud, ransomware, network hunting module, injects, password grab module. That's the typical TrickBot, and the APT domain was that the Anchor project. The Anchor is also a name used within the TrickBot PGP path. Loaders or bots itself, as you might see in our blog that we published with, actually when we discovered with Sentinel Labs, was that the Anchor was that's kind of the flavor of TrickBot, almost like a fork of the core project of TrickBot. You can see that they also derive the memory scraper point of sale malware also there is also used exclusively by the group. There's also Anchor bot. And then the unique thing was the Power Tangba. That's the tool believed to be uniquely attributed to Lazarus group. It's a PowerShell version of Ratangba, same malware that used to actually target the Polish Central Authority. Bank actually quite some time ago when BAE noticed that. So they're also kind of pretty notably attributed to the group that we are talking about. And the unique aspects that the kind of as just to come back and bring home the idea is that once identifying high value targets, there was a TrickBot Anchor server that has this task, as you can see, ecom box store, with the action cget pass that was executed and downloaded and high profile victim bot. And that was the exact PowerShell version of Power Tangba, which is also, again, uniquely attributed to the Lazarus group. And that's where the unique nexus is. And that's also led us to believe that, so the groups are also very connected more than just on the relationship side. They're probably part of the access as a service model, where, for example, the group or the person who executed a task to download Power Tangba on behalf of, we're assuming, the Lazarus group, was also very familiar with the TrickBot operators, or might be in very close proximity. And we also know that, for example, that North Korea also deploys proxies, or very connected to the underground world as it is, as there have been numerous documented cases of them either working directly or sharing bots with also the group called TA505 or the TrickBot. And it's also just to show you the example of that. As you remember earlier, I showed you the ecom backstore URL, where the action was aget PSB, and it was downloaded through on the red bank, that the bank in Chile intrusion, and that was the Power Tangba through the fake, I guess, resume application process, where some of the software developers inside the bank was targeted by the Lazarus group via LinkedIn apparently, and they spoke on the phone and Skype, and they downloaded this app as an application that was just to install and ruse them into direct bank internal installations. But the same URL we found in TrickBot, it's also with one difference is the one that they saw was the aget PSB, but we also see get PSB. That's a last action argument used by the same server. So pretty interesting, and that kind of shows the unique and first opportunity we saw of the direct link between first confirmed technical link between the TrickBot and Lazarus. It was pretty exciting when we discovered and continued to see that, and it kind of highlights this idea. The bot that they executed task on was a high-profile victim, and the way they've been profiled, again, as we mentioned, is that's through network and Active Directory parsing, and also just trying to identify if a high-value target. And just the idea is, like, and also as we've seen at REvil and Maze, for example, some of the most sophisticated groups also become APTs on their own, also work with APT. For example, the REvil works with Fin7. Fin7 supplies some infections to them. And kind of like, not infections, but Fin7 actually extorts some of the companies deploy ransomware as well, because ransomware become very successful And this is kind of like the flavor of the day, where the Crimeware also takes this another step model with kind of like they merged the APT group, the advanced persistent threat groups in ransomware, and now they're also using that approach to maximize publicity. As we know, we live in the world of the social media and the journalism, so that's what they try to do. They try to bring more publicity around breaches and force some like legal actions, and that's something that REvil Unknown, which is the representative behind the group that was super successful currently, that the successor of the Game Crab operations, that also kind of implies that, hey, if you do not like reply back, or if you're not like really interested, there's a GDPR, of course, concerns. And then he basically says that, yeah, instead of like encrypting just files, they threaten to publish them, and it kind of like becomes the flavor. Whenever you're doing incident response work on ransomware cases, look for evidence of exfiltration, because that was the key in many cases. They no longer just simply deploy ransomware and leave, but also find some means and ways and hooks to download more data and make it available for them later to extort, and basically to force the payment from the victims. So one idea I want to show you, and I want you to, to get out of this talk, it's also, as we talked earlier, the whole evolution chain from Zeus, father of Crimeware, Zeus Slavic, to the TrickBot operators working now with the person or purported like person worked before, who is linked with Lazarus group through technical evidence that we saw. We also want to find out some unique YARA hunting opportunities for code reuse. I definitely believe, a huge believer in that code reuse across the different malware samples is the easiest, not the easiest, rather, I would say the most successful and the most highly profitable, I guess, from the hunter side to obtain more value, is just to look for unique implementations of code. But I want to make you think about even a step further. Do not even look for unique code implementation, but look for crypto implementation. Or like if there's opportunity to find a unique cryptographical implementations in the malware, just pursue it and write a quick signature. And that's something that we've been doing for quite some time, and that's something that allows us to even sometimes covertly see the new samples before they get flagged or identified by antivirus engines. And that's something that allows us to be ahead of them. In many ways, it feels like a cat and mouse game. So from the malware developer side, they try to be ahead of the defense. They want to make sure the code is not detected, or it's passes certain AV antivirus detections. But also from our side, we can also hunt for the human behavior, which is the unique implementations of code. So this is kind of like, it's also kind of leads to unique positive things like that, like reducing our workload and allowing us to have high fidelity, long-standing rules across our YARA signatures. And this is just an example of has been tracking. This is the TrickBot loader. This is the one that has the typical custom cryptor with the unique RC4 key implementations, as that we've been tracking since 2019. And the way we can actually, we were tracking through that specific group through unique cryptor. And as we talked about, the TrickBot is linked to Anchor, and Anchor is also was using the same cryptor before, as well as the Ryuk and now Conti. And also Emotet was using similar cryptor. But there's a huge opportunity for us for defense, knowing what their evolution is, knowing what their behavior is, and focusing on them allows us to identify unique YARA signature opportunities. And this is an example where the TrickBot utilized its own unique crypting service for some time, and now it's been frequently updated. And the latest versions also kind of uses the kind of RC4 with a twist. And it's kind of like a key aspect of learning the adversary behaviors and applying our intelligence hat and our intelligence knowledge to the technical domain. It's a perfect opportunity to write a simple unpacker and at the same time to force analyze a modified routine. This is kind of like on the bottom, you'll see it's a kind of like slightly changed SBOX size of the RC4 key. The unique implementations that we saw across the malware, including all the loaders, the precursors to Lazarus that we saw earlier, and actually going forward even, of course, going forward, that's the future we're looking into. That's the unique, what they actually added the ROR13 API hash, and now they have RC4 key with null terminator and SBOX size. You see SBOX size is very non-typical for RC4. It's not the usual size. It's actually 184. So like, as you can see, those who track the crypto implementation that can be super valuable once you see uniquely changed the RC4 key. And oftentimes when you're looking into try to develop automation tools, allow you to have advanced visibility into malware. Oftentimes you can be questions of why my RC4 doesn't work, especially after recognizing the same SBOX as you see here and hash rotating kind of view. And the reason why is that they slightly altered it to make it less easy or for defense to essentially to obtain information about the bot. And this is the key there. It's an example of how you can search for this is just looking for the unique snippets. The unique snippets, as I mentioned actually in tweet as well, as you can see, there's a unique key they used. Oftentimes that's used actually within the stub of a crypter, and stub, it's basically the program they used to kind of like to decrypt and essentially run the crypter itself and pack the core binary of its own. Just kind of a terminology across of it, and it kind of like remains somewhat consistent. As you can see, the snippet of this. Oftentimes, when you look into IDA Pro, I recommend to turn on essentially the opcodes to see what the opcodes. Because oftentimes I write signatures off the opcodes, as you can see on the left side. And snippets will have certain components. Of course, you can wildcard certain bytes, especially those can be changed, and provide opportunity to those that be flexible. And the SBOX size, as you can see, that's something super notable for us to track, but something that's, again, unique opportunity. Here, that the SBOX size does not account for 184, but this is just a unique example across the samples. As you can see, two aspects of the signature can be used, is that the snippet of the key component, and then again, we are tracking the packed malware. So pretty interesting and kind of like ahead of the threat. And then the SBOX, and that's what the unique TrickBot SBOX RC4 key implementation. The condition, of course, the snippet and SBOX size, just for those who were into writing YARA signatures, that's something that unique crypto implementations in the malware that we were just talking through allows us to have future visions into what they've been doing and what's the new state of malware. And then, of course, you can use unique different things and look for YARA scan, for example, custom SBOX and key for automated static unpacker and scripting, or you relying on certain sandbox feature. So there's a huge and rich opportunities for you to learn and kind of like apply your knowledge on the technical side, and then essentially write a simple or not simple to simple static unpackers. So I want to talk and kind of like give you a few takeaways from the presentations and talk about what the unique things and of course, beyond even the TrickBot anchor and the evidence that we showed earlier, it's that the new kind of flavor of the day is that the automations and malware approach to spam, it's no longer just the spam. It's no longer just the financial fraud exploitations that we saw that they deploy network exploitation operators to staff their infections. There's a convergence of APT and Crimeware, as we talked earlier, is that the network access or the bot access is sold as an access as a service or access as a one opportunity, right? So like access as a commodity. So there's different ways and different means and methods how those Crimeware and APT groups, especially on a financially motivated side, and those are they actually work with APT groups for like TrickBot and for example, that's one of the evidence of the Lazarus group. And that was kind of the hidden nexus between those groups, and that's how they work. And once the TrickBot and anchor identify high value target and they're in close contact with the person who works or affiliated of the group as known to be a Lazarus North Korean state sponsored group, they would ask them to download a task and profile the machine or doing something similar to that extent, whatever they would do. And the way they would do it through, for example, this was the PowerShell or actually download and execute type of task. And this is kind of like the new flavor, or rather the trending flavor of the day, where the cybercrime meets APT, especially on the ransomware side, where after successful network exploitation operations, after they steal all the databases, and squeeze the value from the financial direct fraud exploitations, they would essentially use it for ransomware, as ransomware deemed to be highly profitable. In other ways, not only use the ransomware, but also use Ransomhacks. So hack the data and then extort the victims publicly. So make sure the news can cover the stories and journalists can report on them, and of course, enforce more pressure to the board to comply with the cybercrime demands. And one of the interesting things across all of them, I want to get away with the kind of quick tips and quick idea behind the presentations as to how to use the YARA, which is a signature matching tool, and just looking for the malware developers. And the way to look for malware developers for unique cryptologic implementations. So the logical keys are the future. The logical keys provide the highest value add for us. And also, and I think it's also a very efficient way of going forward, because oftentimes the string matching is not enough, or even the code reuse does not meet the demand of hunters to search across the new and emerging malware threats. And so yeah, the idea is just to hunt for the crypto logic implementations. So on this note, I would like to thank you for attending my online virtual talk. I would love to be in person, but this year is a special year for many of us. Please feel free to reach out if you have any questions, and I'm passing the microphone back to the organizers.